happy first week of the new year. Turn to the person next to you and say, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We have a wonderful year ahead of us, don't we? We do, in all ways. And one of the things that here at the Zen Center we're doing for the new year is to focus a little bit on very important text. Many of you have heard about Dogen Zenji, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, right? And many of you know that one of the most famous and important books in Zen is called the Shobo Genzo, Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, right? Many of you? And those of you who are just hearing about it for the first time, it's a really, really important book, both in Zen and in Asian philosophy, because it's just such an amazing examination of reality and how we see things and how to practice with how we see things and with reality. So it's an amazing text. And we have it in the background, and of course we have many translations on the library shelves, but it's in the background of everything we talk about here. So we thought it would be fun to weave it into our Dharma talks for a whole year. So we won't necessarily do a scholarly talk about each fascicle every week, but we'll have some references to it. So the first one in the recent great translation, different translators and different scholars order these 95, there are 95 of them, so it's going to take us a bit more than a year. But different scholars put the fascicles in a slightly different order. But the latest translation, which is just amazing, very scholarly but very deep, puts the Genjo Koan first. So that's why we chanted the Genjo Koan during service today. I'll weave it in a little bit to this talk also, because the Genjo Koan, one translation of the title is Koan of Everyday Life. Some people say that, because every moment of our day is one of these koans or practice opportunity. In the latest translation, they call it the realized koan. So, because it's not just practicing with every moment of our life, it's the realization at every moment of our life, the realization of reality. One of the standout, we've divided into paragraphs, so one of the standout paragraphs is, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs, actualizing the fundamental point. Isn't that great? When you just take your place where you are, practice occurs. Practice comes right to you. The part of it that I really want to talk about today, because it's how I want to practice with this new year. Sorry. The reality is she has a bit of a cold, so I feel fine, but it's about the wind. So those of you who've read this writing over and over, before I go into that, I'll say, and next week, the Dharma talk will be by Lynn Snow, who's a wonderful teacher in Alabama, but she can't come from Alabama, so it will be on Zoom. So she'll talk about the second fascicle, which is the Heart Sutra, the Great Heart Sutra. And the following week, Brandon Lamson will be here, and he will talk about, he's so lucky, the fascicle is Buddha nature. Ooh. So we'll include that. Sometime later in the year, there will be the fascicles about how to wash your hands correctly, so I'm not sure who's going to get that one. We'll see. But this Genjo Koan has a great story toward the end about the wind. Do you remember that? Okay, so this monk comes up to a great teacher who's sitting there fanning himself, and Bao Che. So a monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent. Why do you fan yourself?" So what do you think wind means in that context? The nature of wind is permanent. Why then do you fan yourself? And Bao-Che replied, although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent, you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere. Monk, not going to give up, said, what is the meaning of its reaching everywhere? Asked the monk again. The master just kept fanning himself. The monk bowed deeply. And then later in the concluding lines of the fascicle of the chapter are, do you want to move over? You can move and stand. You're okay? Now that I've brought all attention on you? I'm going to be talking about that later on, actually. It says, that brings forth the gold of the wind of the Buddha's house, brings forth the gold of the earth, and makes fragrant the cream of the long river. That's also what I want to talk about, that particular wind. So we have a year coming ahead that is going to have some strong winds. We've had in the ordinary sense, in the sense of things coming at us, strong winds. And one of the things that we also chanted today in the Heart Sutra, sorry, not quite enough room here. Let me move back a bit. So the Heart Sutra is a compressed version of the entire path of Zen, of Mahayana. Everything is in there. That's why it's really hard to kind of approach the way we do it, which is just chanting it every week. But it's chanted every week, everywhere, all over the world, because it's the core of our practice. But you have to then spend some time decoding it. And several of the fascicles that we'll look at from Dogen Zenji refer to different lines and different teachings. But one of them in there is just referred to very quickly. It says, far from all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. Have you all read that? Just kind of far from all inverted views. Well, that is a specific teaching in our way, an old teaching, that when we are blown by the wind, our views are inverted. And there are four main groups of two that we are particularly prone to have upside down. So there are ways of saying inverted views, upside down views, and there are four sets that we're really vulnerable to. And they are seeing as pleasurable what is actually painful, seeing as permanent what is actually impermanent, seeing as pure what is actually impure, and seeing as having permanent self what is in fact devoid of self, especially ourselves. Don't those kind of resonate? They sound very familiar. Seeing as pleasurable what is actually painful. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but these are in the ancient teachings, the Buddha's discourses. These are the things that really knock us away from seeing reality as it is. So it helps us avoid realization because we go toward the things, we get confused. We just get confused. And it's the winds of our life that are pushing us away from seeing things as they are and toward seeing them upside down. So from the standpoint of our Tathagata, our teachings of Buddha Dharma, when we see things correctly, that's actually where pleasure and bliss is. When we see things correctly, that's actually seeing what's permanent. When we see things correctly, that's actually when we recognize what's pure. But that's what all this practice is about, to clarify the way we see things. It's not that we're suddenly going to give up pleasure or all sorts of things. It's that by practice, we turn toward what's actually pleasurable, what's actually blissful and permanent. So why is it so hard? It's very hard because we're built that way. We're built this way. And there are really important studies, many, many studies about how our minds work, of course. But in terms of the way we're built from ancient times, we call that natural selection. So from ancient times, in order to survive as a species, various qualities were privileged and selected over other qualities. So if back in the millennia before now, if one of our ancestors really liked fire and went over to the fire and got in it, it would not be a good survival technique. So we selected against going toward fire. We selected toward recognizing what fire is. And these recognitions in natural selection, things like this, are called feelings. These feelings also have a judgment in them. So judgment, that is bad. But it's before thinking. We're just built to have these responses, and we're very responsive. So really, this is very important for us, interesting also. So some of these things are called, we're not trying to give them up, because some of them are really important for us, even today, to survive. So they're in a category called false positives. And we have these from ancient times. And one of the great examples of a false positive is that you can all observe in yourself is you're on a trail, you've been told at the retreat center that there are scorpions and snakes and all sorts of bad things out there. So you see a movement on the trail and you think snake and you shy away, and then you look closely and it's actually a lizard. But what's interesting is that for a nanosecond, when you see the creature, you see a snake. It's embedded so deeply. And that's a kind of false positive that we actually don't want to get rid of, right? So isn't it, we are built to be deluded about certain things. We're built to assume that things like that are dangerous. And we actually even see the danger. Isn't it interesting? So in that context, we're not trying to give, in that example, we're not trying to give those up. But what we, as practitioners and grown-ups, what we want to do is adapt to it more quickly. Okay, wow, I thought it was a snake. In fact, I saw a snake. Isn't that fascinating? So that part of our mind, we are just learning to love. And then there's a whole category of things that we are endowed with that basically were created for when we were living in tiny little groups of hunters and gatherers, in tiny little groups, and we're very strongly built to care about certain things that are based on that old context, but unfortunately, they still happen. And that's what we get to learn about. So I have maybe four examples. I have 4 examples that really kind of spoke to me and I thought would be interesting. One is, this is sort of not so much about the small groups, it's a different kind of built-in human recognition. We're built to go toward delicious things. And we're not built, we don't sit there and think, I need food, I'm a human mammal, I need some food, and I'm going to look at delicious things, and that looks delicious, I'll take that. It's way before that. It's way before words. So in ancient days, the sweetest thing we could recognize would be fruit, and we're built to go toward that. But now that's been replaced by things like donuts and things like that. And what other things are there? Candy, donuts, chocolate, soda, chips. McDonald's, yeah. So we're built to, McDonald's is a good example because it's powerful nutrition in a very concentrated form. So that would be a high value for us if we were hunter-gatherers. But unfortunately, it isn't so valuable to us now. In fact, it causes us lots of problems. So this deep, basic urge to go toward the sweetest thing in the room, the highest calorie content in the room, that one we have to work with. Isn't it interesting? But it's really good, I think, to know that this is one of the ancient winds blowing us that way. It's not that I'm a bad person because I like this thing. It's that my whole human life turns me that way. Isn't that good to know? And then after a while, as grown-ups and people who actually have the power to make decisions, you see it and categorize it and decide, well, that I'm not going to indulge in. Isn't that fascinating? Now, here are three others that are really important. One is rage. So in my example, it's road rage. In the thinking of these people who study natural selection, to get mad when you're treated with a little bit of disrespect or taken advantage of was a survival technique in a small society, because if you let people do that, they might do it again. Or if you let people sort of treat you with disrespect, other people might witness it and think they could sort of take your tent or whatever, because you're a person who doesn't defend. So the defense mechanism is actually part of our very basic mammal equipment. But it's meant to be with people who are going to see us again and part of our tribe. Like here, if Neely tries to take Royce's zagu, Royce would, do something. And then later they would make it up. So that's part of what we don't have, because this kind of very primeval defense mechanism comes up, and yet we're never going to see those people again. So it doesn't make any difference. We're not proving anything to them with our road rage, because they're just going to go on. They probably didn't even notice. So we're hardwired to communicate in a group setting that this is not right, that you treated me with disrespect and cut me off or something like that, and yet nobody witnesses it. So it's a blown by the wind kind of residue from our past. Isn't that interesting? And so it's not going away. A lot of us have figured out how to work with it immediately, but that doesn't mean it's not happening right there. Treated with disrespect. Japan, I'll be going there next Sunday, as the Tanto said, and Japanese people are super sensitive to things like that because they live in a tight society. So they're still living that way, where being treated with respect and not having your dignity compromised is a workable practice. So everybody treats everybody. And in England, too, where manners are so important. A small island, big consequences if you let people take your land. But still, it's just a survival. So road rage. And here's one that, what's your name? That I called out? Yeah.
Me? Magdalena.
Magdalena. Nice to meet you. So when I pointed you out, this is actually an example of two things. One is, have you ever had the experience of like having a kind of curt interchange with somebody and then walking away and fretting about it because you weren't sure you offended them, and then time passes and you think, should I call them to find out if it really bothered them, or am I making too much of that?
Yes.
That's also, that's also according to the scientists, part of our ancient programming. We are built to really care if we hurt other people's feelings, and we really care what other people think about us. So in the example of, like, did I hurt Magdalena's feelings, and is she going to be mad at me? Should I check it out? In our world, we just did it. We just checked it out. It's fine. So in a hunter-gatherer society, you're going to see the person in 10 minutes because their tent is just down the road. And so you can go down and say, hey, was that okay? And they say, what? Of course, it's fine. I know I could see that your fire wasn't going in your tent or something. So in a small society where we know we're going to see people right away, these things are quite possible. We like that, to check it out. But in our society where maybe I wouldn't have seen Magdalena for a week, you carry that. It's worrying you, because the social web is a little bit challenged. Isn't that interesting? So then in our world, what we have to do is we have to figure out how to deal with that, because ignoring it isn't good. Then we're just going around not caring about our impact on other people. But how we work with it is really one of the sources of stress in our life, I think. But it's built in that we care what other people think about us, and that we care how we impact other people. So my final example, which is one of my favorites, because in the 5 fears, the 5 great fears that Buddha talked about, there, fear of death of a loved one, fear of loss of livelihood, fear of loss of reputation. The 5th one is fear of giving a public talk. 5 major fear. But in olden times, they say, it was not so consequential, because you were performing in public in your small group all the time. People saw you all the time. You could stand up and make an announcement around the group fire, and then 5 minutes later you'd be talking to people. It was just a small part of the information people had about you. And whether you had a good impact or a bad impact, you could see right away. And then it flows on in the community that you live in. But even by the time of the Buddha, society was more complex. And so he would travel around. So you'd travel and be in different groups. And many of them were strangers. And the only information they had to judge you as a human being was this talk, this PowerPoint presentation, this lecture. This is the only thing. So people the person I was reading said that even he knows all of this, and he still can't sleep at night before a big presentation, because we're built to really care, and this is the only moment people will have to judge you. Isn't that amazing? So even by the time of the Buddha, it was they were reaping the benefit of that ancient hardwired programming. So we have to, we get to recognize it and work with it. But it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard. So it doesn't go away. It's not that our practice is to obliterate these feelings, because that's not particularly healthy. That's kind of like psychopathology, isn't it? If we don't care about our impact on others, and we're indifferent to how they think of us, or if we think, well, everybody loves me, this is fine, that's not a healthy human being. It's this other territory. So that's where our practice comes in. And for me, we just talked about the wind of the Buddha's house. So in the midst of these great winds, we could say karma. This is part of our karma, this ancient programming that comes through us. Very strong winds are blowing us to think a certain way, to do a certain way, do certain things, to interpret other people a certain way. Very strong winds. And we, with our practice, have a choice about which wind we're going to attend to. So the wind of the Buddha's house is blowing also. And at first, it's very subtle, very subtle. I got a text from someone the other day, and I know, young people, I get texts from my grandchildren, and they're very curt, but I know, this person loves me, I love this person, okay, curt. But sometimes from people in my peer group, when I get a curt text, I wonder, what's going on with them? Why didn't they say, Dear Gaelyn, signed Bruce, or whatever? So I thought, something going on with this person in our relationship. I'm sorry, it's true. And I chose to, I recognized the concern blowing, and I could interpret it as a little bit of check in our relationship that I have to check out. But I decided to listen to the wind of the Buddha's house and just love that person, assume all is well, assume the best, which turned out to be the true interpretation in this case. But I listened for the wind of the Buddha's house. I felt for that wind. We have that choice now. We do have that choice. And it's not easy to actualize it. So that also is something that we have to attend to. You could say, at this point, the winds, the ordinary winds of my karmic interpretations are really pushing me. And I have to go with that. Importance of Sangha, importance of community, is that we do check it out with the Sangha. Do you think that this curt message means such and such? And they can tell you what they think. So it's really important to open ourselves up to other people's interpretations. And the aggregate can move us toward the Buddha way. That last little passage in the Genjo Koan, the wind of the Buddha's house brings forth the gold of the earth and makes fragrant the cream of the long river. The wind of the Buddha's house is one of the ways of interpreting that is it's the accumulated power of all of our practice that's blowing in the world. And it is. All of that is having an impact. So we call it wind. Brings forth the gold of the earth. Another translation that I actually prefer is reveals the gold of the earth. The wind of the Buddha's house kind of shows us the golden earth and makes fragrant the cream of the long river. Different interpretations. In some, they say the long river is the Milky Way. Makes fragrant the Milky Way, which I love because it turns our gaze upward. But that's not so helpful in Houston. It's there. It's right up. It's actually right up there, but it's hard to see. And then, in terms of the cream is sort of like in. It could be cream or it could be ghee, concentrated butter, but that would have been a rare pleasure in that time. And I felt we live in such a rich society where these treats and cream and ghee easily available to anybody, anytime. So for us, we have to put some other valued commodity in there. Makes fragrant the cream of the long river, hard. And also rivers were so precious and life-giving and pure. So that's what I want for us. I want us to be blown, recognize that we're blown by the Buddha's wind, blown by our shared practice, and able to make choices about how we attend to reality. That's my wish for the new year. May it be so.